In 1900, Galveston, Texas was the Queen of the Gulf, a thriving port city full of life and promise. But on September 8th, the Gulf unleashed a storm so fierce it would change the city forever. At St. Mary's Orphan Asylum, 90 children and 10 Sisters of Charity tied themselves together to face the storm. Only 3 boys would survive. Welcome to History, where we uncover profound, historic, and timeless events through captivating storytelling. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. In 1900, Galveston, Texas was a marvel of progress and prosperity. Its deepwater harbor made it the economic heart of the Gulf Coast, processing 70% of the nation's cotton. The Strand, Galveston's financial district, buzzed with commerce, its grand architecture a testament to the city's wealth and ambition. For brothers Will and Joe Murney, Galveston was more than a city, it was home. 13-year-old Will and his 8-year-old brother Joe had lived at St. Mary's Orphan Asylum for 6 years after losing their parents. Life at the orphanage was warm and structured, with the Sisters of Charity providing education, discipline, and care. Alongside their friend Albert Campbell, the boys spent their days playing on the beach, watching ships at the docks, and dreaming of adventures far beyond the horizon. But for all its beauty and promise, Galveston was a city built on fragile ground. With its highest point just 9 feet above sea level, it had no seawall to protect it from the Gulf's wrath. Isaac Klein, director of the Weather Bureau's Galveston office, had dismissed the idea of a seawall in an 1891 article, arguing that a storm of significant strength would never strike the island. Local politics ensured that no such defenses were built, leaving Galveston exposed to the whims of the sea. On the morning of September 8th, the Gulf shimmered under a golden sunrise. Families went about their routines, shopkeepers opened their doors, and the docks bustled with activity. But by midday, the Gulf's demeanor began to shift. Waves grew restless, crashing harder against the shore. The wind picked up, carrying with it an uneasy chill. The sky darkened to a deep gray, and seasoned sailors on the docks muttered warnings of something ominous approaching. At the Weather Bureau office, Isaac Klein watched with growing alarm as the barometer fell sharply. Without modern technology to track or predict storms, Klein could only observe its signs and then warn residents of rising danger. But by then it was already too late. The storm was upon them. By evening, the sky turned an eerie shade of deep red, casting an apocalyptic glow over the city. Then, with a ferocity few could comprehend, the storm struck. The wind howled at 120 miles per hour, a relentless screaming force that tore roofs from buildings and hurled debris like missiles. Entire homes were ripped apart, their shattered remains carried off by the rising water. Gigantic ocean swells pounded the coastline, lifting boats from the harbor and flinging them into the streets like toys. Farmhouses on the outskirts of the city were flattened, their crops torn from the ground and scattered across the flooded landscape. Anything not tied down became a deadly projectile. Barrels, planks, shards of glass, all flying through the air with terrifying speed. The sound was deafening. The whistle of the wind, the crash of the waves, the shattering of glass, and the groan of metal twisting under pressure. For the 38,000 residents of Galveston, there was no mass evacuation, no emergency responders, no hope of rescue. Many barricaded themselves in their basement or climbed to their roofs as the water rose, their voices crying out into the storm. Some prayed, others screamed in terror. At St. Mary's Orphan Asylum, the sisters moved quickly to protect the children. They herded them to the second floor as water flooded the ground level. The building shuddered with every gust of wind, the walls groaning under the strain. Knowing the dangers, the sisters tied the children together with clothesline in groups of 8 or 9, fastening each group to themselves. Will held Joe tightly, the younger boy trembling as the storm roared around them. The sisters led the children in singing Queen of the Waves, their voices rising above the chaos. Help us now, dear Lady of the Wave. The wind intensified, shaking the building like a beast determined to tear it apart. Windows shattered, sending shards of glass flying like knives. The walls buckled, and the wooden beams overhead groaned, splintering under the relentless force of the storm. The floorboards beneath their feet began to tremble, and then a deafening crack. The orphanage collapsed. Will felt himself yanked away, his grip on Joe slipping as the rushing waters swallowed them whole. Wood, debris, and bodies were tossed in the churning darkness. "I was holding Joe as tight as I could," Will later said. "Then a wave hit and something struck me hard. Everything went dark." When Will awoke, he was tangled in the branches of a tree. Nearby, his friend Albert Campbell and another classmate, Frank Madera, clung to pieces of wreckage, their faces pale with shock. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence. As dawn broke, the scale of devastation became clear. Entire neighborhoods had been wiped off the map, their remains scattered across the flooded streets. Galveston was a wasteland. Between 6,000 and 12,000 people had perished, making it the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. At St. Mary's, rescuers found the bodies of the sisters and children still tied together by the ropes. It was a haunting sight, a testament to their courage and love. Will, Albert, and Frank made their way through the ruins, their bond forged in tragedy. They were the only survivors from the orphanage, a fact that weighed heavily on their young shoulders. "I hear just one terrible, solid scream of 100 children," Frank would later say. As weeks turned into months, Galveston began the process of rebuilding. President William McKinley called for national aid, but the response was slow. Survivors burned bodies in massive piers to prevent the spread of disease, the smoke rising as a somber marker of the city's loss. In the years that followed, Galveston fortified itself, raising the city's elevation and constructing a seawall to protect against future storms. But the memories of that night remained, a reminder of both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Will Murney seldom spoke of the storm, but when he did, he always mentioned the sisters' bravery. "They gave their lives for us," he said simply. The story of St. Mary's Orphans Asylum, of the sisters and the children bound together in life and death, became a symbol of love and sacrifice. As Galveston survivors began the grim task of recovery, another haunting image emerged. Coffins unearthed by the storm floated through the flooded streets and out to sea. Among them was the coffin of Charles Francis Coughlin, a British actor who had died in Galveston the year before. When locals reached the cemetery, they discovered Coughlin's crypt destroyed, his coffin gone. The Actors Association of New York offered a reward for its return, sparking a search that extended across the Gulf, but no trace of it was found. 7 years later, in October 1907, fishermen off Prince Edward Island, Coughlin's birthplace, discovered a coffin washed ashore. The name engraved on the plaque confirmed the incredible. Charles Francis Coughlin had returned home, carried more than 3,000 miles by the ocean's currents. Was this journey a remarkable twist of fate, or was it a legend born from the chaos of the storm? Like so many stories from the Galveston hurricane, the truth remains as mysterious as the storm itself. Today, a plaque marks the site where St. Mary's Orphan Asylum once stood, a solemn tribute to the children and sisters who perished. Their story, like Galveston's, endures.
New Heath Story episodes drop twice a week only on the Jim Heath channel. If you'd like to help keep Heath Story going, consider supporting us on Patreon.